I'm very pleased to introduce my friend and mentor, Peter Filichia.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Talking before that for many years, Peter was one of the main drama critics in the New York area because he was the theater critic for the Newark Star Ledger, which is the most important newspaper in northern New Jersey and really one of the most important in the country. And so he's seen everything. Is that an exaggeration, Peter?
Well, I'd say that of the last 60 years, I've seen 80 to 90% of the shows that have been on Broadway.
Yeah, there you go. And so yeah, somebody, what's your favorite show? Somebody put your favorite show. Len says Fiddler is his favorite show. Do you remember how many performances Fiddler was, Peter? I know I'm showing you off, but
3,242.
okay, so just to give you an example, we're not going to do this over and over, but that's the kind of thing that Peter knows. For him, it's like baseball statistics for some of the people that I went to high school with. And Peter knows all kinds of information, not only about the people and phenomena behind Broadway shows, but also on interpreting them and understanding them. So I just want to start, Peter, I'm going to, pass the class on to you in just 1 second, but somebody brought up, and I don't know the answer, to talk a little bit about Lin-Manuel Miranda's Spanish lyrics for West Side Story. Is that something you can tell us a little about?
The idea actually came from Tom Hatcher, who was Lerner's longtime boyfriend. I don't think they ever got married officially, but they had been together for time immemorial. In fact, Anyone Can Whistle, the 1964 musical, if you get the published script, written by Lawrence, you will see it's dedicated to Tom Hatcher. So as a result, they'd been together a long, long time. And he's the one who said to Arthur Lawrence, with this upcoming revival, why don't you use Spanish lyrics? That'd be a great thing. It would also make the audience aware of the fact that there's such a dynamic difference between the Puerto Rican kids and the so-called American kids. So Lawrence thought it was a great idea. Well, Lin-Manuel Miranda had just had a big success with In the Heights, which was a Latin-centric show talking about people in Washington Heights. No musical had ever been set in Washington Heights, way, way, way up at the tip of Manhattan. It made for a wonderful visual image because you saw the George Washington Bridge, which is great to look at, but do you want to live up there? A lot of people don't. A lot of people felt that it was a dangerous neighborhood. Lin-Manuel Miranda succeeded in making us feel like it was a warm and welcoming neighborhood. And it's become a very hot real estate area now as a result of In the Heights. So they went to him and they said, we'd like you to do it. And Lynn said to me that he was very gun shy about doing this because, after all, you're talking about Stephen Sondheim's lyrics. And by this point, Stephen Sondheim had the greatest career of any of these men who've created West Side Story. Sure, a lot of that had to do with the fact that Jerome Robbins left Broadway after 1964 and didn't show up again until 1989, where he simply did a retrospective of his shows. Bernstein was mentored by a guy named Serge Kosovitsky, who said, why are you bothering with these Broadway shows? They're candy. You could write meaty things. And so Bernstein really didn't care about Broadway very much, where he should have, because we remember West Side Story and Candide, and even On the Town and Wonderful Town, more than we remember any of his classical pieces that he tried to do. So, but Sondheim now had become the genius, the absolute genius of musical theater. And Lin-Manuel Miranda was petrified going to him and say, listen, it can't work this way. It has to work that way. But Sondheim was very gracious about it because he thought it was a good idea too. Unfortunately, audiences didn't. They didn't at all. And halfway during the run, they actually said, the hell with it, let's go back to English lyrics, because the audience, you can feel that they're not responding to it. And the thing is, every time an audience has a little bit less of a good time, it chips away, and you come out of the theater saying, well, that was all right. That was okay. Yeah, that was good. but you don't come out saying, oh my God, that was phenomenal. Oh, I got to see it again. And so that West Side Story revival did not last as long as people thought it would, only a matter of months. And many people felt it was because of the Spanish lyrics. By the time they changed it, word of mouth had gotten around that indeed what had happened was the people weren't enjoying the show so much. Yeah, I went the other night. It was okay. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you'd like it, but that's not good enough to sell tickets. So it was a noble experiment, and it should have worked. What should have happened, which would have been much smarter, is using super titles. But by this point, that costs money. And by this point, the producers, and it takes 1 million producers now to produce a show. And that's only a slight exaggeration by the number. But the thing is, by that point, the producers said, no, let's just go back to the English lyrics. But it might have been a very interesting experiment if we had seen the super titles. And of course, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
It's funny that you're talking about this. I hadn't thought about this when I brought it up, but I actually, the very first night I learned Spanish, I went to Madrid to learn Spanish. I knew other languages, but other Romance languages, but not Spanish. Very first night, West Side Story was playing.
No kidding.
So I went, right? And of course I understood every word, but I Inside Story, West Side Story inside out, right?
Yes.
So I imagine that the participants hearing I Feel Pretty sung in Spanish knew that those words mean I feel pretty, but they still felt, alienated.
Yeah, I think it really had to do with the feeling of alienation rather than not understanding what was going on. I know what you're talking about. It reminds me of I went to see The King and I in Tokyo. And the thing was, the woman who played Anna was Eurasian, and the kid who played Louis, her son, was Eurasian. So they looked English enough. Everybody else, now to my eyes, I mean, I'm not saying that Thai people are identical to Japanese people, but to my unfamiliar eyes, they looked exactly the same. So because I knew The King and I inside out, I really was lulled into thinking it was an English language production because I knew what everybody was saying until Sir Edward Ramsay came in the second act, Anna's old boyfriend, and he came in, he looked like Sessue Hayakawa. And that's when I remembered that I was actually in Tokyo and I wasn't seeing an English language production. But your point is very well taken, that people did know the lyrics. And why do people know the lyrics? Well, people forget about West Side Story is it wasn't that big a hit when it was first produced. Yes, 732 performances for the original run. That's a very good run, healthy. Everybody made money. It was fine, but it was never the smash hit. It didn't do well at the Tonys. It only won 2 Tony Awards, and one was for set. And the thing was, in the set category, that year they lumped 5 shows together as a set. Oliver Smith was nominated not just for West Side Story, but for 4 other shows. So we don't even know if he won because indeed everybody loved West Side Story set, or it was just a case of quantity over quality, that the guy did 5 shows, let's give him the prize. Jerome Robbins, of course, won for dance choreography, but they got shut out in so many other categories. And even somebody like Chita Rivera, who played Anita, didn't even get a nomination. It wasn't that big a hit. That year's big hit was Music Man, and Music Man won the Tony over West Side Story and beat it in so many other categories. Robert Preston, of course, is Harold Hill, and Barbara Cook is Marion. They won in their categories. So it wasn't that big a hit. And Harold Prince, this was only it was a very early show for Harold Prince. He was second bill to Robert Griffith, who was an established producer. And their first show was Pajama Game, which was a big hit. The next show was Damn Yankees, which was a big hit. The next show was New Girl in Town, which was not such a big hit, but a hit. People made money. But the thing was, Cheryl Crawford, who was a very ambitious producer, actually had the rights to West Side Story. She also had the rights to The Diary of Anne Frank at one point, too. But because of legal machinations, and there are fascinating stories about that, she dropped that because she was scared. And she dropped West Side Story because she was scared of it. And at that point, Stephen Sondheim, who was friendly with with Harold Prince, called him up and said, "We don't have a producer anymore." And Prince said, "Well, I'm in Boston with New Girl in Town. Let me think about it." Things happened fast in those days. New Girl in Town opened May 14th. West Side Story opened September 26th. It's amazing how quickly shows came together in those days. But of course, it was long a morning. But But the thing was that Harold Prince really was the one who said to Robert Griffin, this is something we should do.
Visit thebroadwaymaven.com to learn about a free online Broadway appreciation course every Monday at noon and 7 p.m.
Harold Prince closed it too soon, so we decided maybe there's still a little life in it. Let's bring it back. And they brought it back, and it lasted 249 performances. So, but the thing that made West Side Story was that 1961 movie. And part of it had to do with my generation, the baby boomers. I'm the quintessential baby boomer. I was born 9 months after World War II ended, and all of us were crazy about that movie. And the thing was that girls often had to drag us to that movie, but boys liked it. As my friend Bert Silverberg says, he teaches in Rhode Island. He says, I have the hardest time casting boys in shows. It's just murderously hard. If you say to a boy, do a musical, they'll say, I don't want to do a musical. But if you tell them they can be a shark or a jet, suddenly they're interested and they'll do the musical. And that's what happened. I mean, it was the gang warfare that certainly intrigued the boys of my generation. And they certainly put up with the one hand, one heart scene where the kids were Maria and Tony are thinking of their marriage, which is the closest they'll ever get to being married. But because there was violence and all that, the boys went to it and they wound up liking it more than they wanted to admit. So even the kids who said, I hate when they sing, and a lot of people feel that way about musicals. When you think of it, that statement doesn't really make sense. Think of who your favorite singer is. If it's Frank Sinatra or Bruce Springsteen, they come out on stage, they start singing, don't they? Why aren't they talking? Why are they singing? I mean, there's more motivation in a musical for a person singing there is for somebody walking on stage. Why isn't he talking to you? So anyway, but we're the ones who made West Side Story the standard that it is. The famous songs, Maria and Tonight, weren't even well known at that point in time. The biggest hit song from West Side Story could arguably be da 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 da. Why? Because it was used in commercials for band deodorant. And that was ubiquitous on the networks in those days. Band deodorant, I don't even know if there is band deodorant anymore, but they actually used that da 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 theme from Bernstein, and it became very well known. But the songs Maria and Tonight barely got recorded from 57 to 61. Then the movie made an explosion. They became standards, but not originally, not at all. And part of the reason, of course, that West Side Story had a hard time of it originally when it opened had to do with the fact that it wasn't that much earlier that we had the Cape Man murders by Salvador Agron, that actually there was violence and people died through stupid, ridiculous warfare that didn't have to happen. Juvenile delinquency was really, really a big thing in the news at that time. There were a lot of movies like The Blackboard Jungle that certainly made people take a look at this. And so it really was considered an epidemic, this violence, which was another reason why a lot of people didn't want to go to West Side Story in the first place. They didn't want to be reminded that the teenagers were getting out of control and were doing these things. So that was a very important part of it as well. So, but by the time the movie came around, I mean, kids made that movie, as I say, and as a result, the kids were very much at home with the idea that kids their age would act out in this way because they were rebellious teenagers themselves, and they felt that. It was more extreme, of course, but nevertheless, this was a way that they certainly showed that rebellion was something that they understood. And yet you did feel bad for these kids. And one of the reasons you felt bad was the fact that Arthur Lawrence really upped the stakes in West Side Story from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Now, one of the unfair things about West Side Story is Shakespeare never gets credit. Try to find a poster of West Side Story where it says based on Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. There's never been one. I mean, because Shakespeare was in the public domain, needless to say, enough time had passed for him to be in the public domain, he didn't have to get credit. And it would have been nice, though, to say it was a musical version of Romeo and Juliet. And there were a lot of talk about that time about whether or not they should put it on. A lot of people thought it would be an asset. People saying, oh, wow, they made a musical of Romeo and Juliet. That sounds great. Well, other people said, oh, it's Shakespeare, huh? I better stay away from that. I don't like Shakespeare. Maybe it's all done in Shakespearean language. Nobody knew. I mean, posters come out, you read things in the newspaper, ads, but nobody really knew. So they thought they would be safer by not giving Shakespeare credit. But somewhere in heaven, Shakespeare is very upset that he's not getting credit for West Side Story.
Peter,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
about Taming of the Shrew? When they did Kiss Me Kate, did they downplay that it was Shakespeare, or did they?
Well, the thing about that's really not an actual musicalization of Taming of the Shrew. That is a story of backstage about people putting on Taming of the Shrew. So it wasn't that threatening to people because it was really seemed more like a backstage story. You didn't get very much Taming of the Shrew. You did get some, but you didn't get very much Taming of the Shrew in Kiss Me Kate, which, yes, predated West Side Story by 9 years.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you for a second. There
Okay.
was more Shakespearean language by far in Kiss Me Kate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. But a dollop of it, really, comparatively speaking, I doubt that it's 3%, maybe even 2% of the show. Okay. But anyway, that they didn't want to give Shakespeare credit. They felt it might be a liability rather than an asset.
I just want to tell you something somebody in the chat said. Alice says, it's good that they didn't tell people that it was Romeo and Juliet because it would have ruined the end.
Yes and no. Certainly, there's tragedy in West Side Story, and of course, in Romeo and Juliet, both Romeo and Juliet die. In West Side Story, the Romeo dies, Tony, but the Juliet Maria doesn't. Now, originally, when they wrote it, they did have Maria die, to have her kill herself with the gun that she shot herself, and it was Richard Rodgers of all people who said to them, she's dead already, and they don't do it. It would just be too great a tragedy, but we know that she's really devastated. Of course, this brings up a good point, and this will sound cynical, but seriously, if Chino had not killed Tony and Tony and Maria married, what kind of marriage would they have? Now, we have to realize these kids fell in love at first sight. And any of us who fell in love at first sight as teenagers know that there was more to it than that to have a good relationship. And wouldn't these two kids have in-law trouble? I mean, do you really think that Maria's parents would welcome the man who killed their son, their only son? I think they'd have a hard time with the marriage, but we're not supposed to think about that at all. And certainly West Side Story has enough in it that we come out of the theater thinking about what we saw rather than what would have happened had Tony and Maria lived. So, I mean, Tony didn't have great career possibilities, but one of the interesting things about West Side Story is the fact that Tony, the co-founder of the Jets with Riff, has dropped out. He is not interested anymore in being part of a gang, and he gets a job in a candy store. Now, indeed, this is not a great career opportunity, but it reminds me of something that's said in Sweet Charity. In Sweet Charity, when Charity meets the movie star, she says that she's a dental hygienist rather than she's a dance hall hostess. And he says to her, well, I don't think, dental hygienist is such a big deal. And she says, it is if you're a dance hall hostess. And the thing is, even though Tony is in a minimum wage job, he's got a job. And who knows, maybe he'll take over the store someday. But the point is, he's trying, and we admire the fact that he's trying. In fact, now that he has a job, he feels so good about himself, he feels that something's coming, something good. He doesn't know what it is, as he says. Something's cannonballing out of the sky. What an interesting word, cannonballing. Who would have thought of that lyric? Well, Sondheim did. Sondheim came down very, very hard on his lyrics for West Side Story. The way all of us do whenever we write anything when we're starting out, we always look back and say, oh my God, I could have done so much better now that I'm so much more experienced. But when you look at those West Side Story lyrics, they're terrific. And he always put himself down for I feel pretty. It's alarming how charming I feel. He said she wouldn't say that. That's somebody in a Noel Coward comedy would say, it's alarming how charming I feel. Yeah, of course, he did want to get that interior rhyme. He loved doing that. Not just having a rhyme at the end of the line, but a rhyme within the line. That was the thing he liked, and he went for that. But really, there are at least 3 lyrics in West Side Story that are sensational beyond belief. One, when Tony and Maria sing, make this endless day, endless night. Now, that's not a fancy rhyme. There's no rhyme in it, but make this endless day, endless night, meaning that when you want something, when you're looking forward to something at night, the day seems to never go by. It seems like it's forever. What time is it? Oh my God, it's only 3 o'clock. Oh, I can't wait till 8 o'clock. And then when 8 o'clock comes, it seems like the night flies by. Then you want the night to be endless. So an endless day, will it ever end? But the endless night, that's what you want. Oh, the night's over so quickly. That's a terrific lyric. Another terrific lyric is in America, which if he's criticizing himself for making Maria too smart, he certainly allows for the way that people have trouble with the English language. And these are Puerto Rican immigrants, after all. When Anita rhymes, I like the island Manhattan, smoke on your pipe and put that in. Well, of course, the actual idiom is put that in your pipe and smoke it. But it is believable to believe that an immigrant who has heard it once or twice mangles it, gets it turned around. But what a terrific idea. Smoke, put well, anyway, you get it. So that's another great lyric. And then there's a very simple lyric in quintet that's marvelous when the Jets sing, well, they began it, and the Sharks sing, well, they began it. That's terrific because both of those groups really believe what they're saying. Each of them believes that the other started the trouble. And we don't know for sure who did, but nevertheless, we can understand, just as they say in the marriage, when a marriage is breaking up, there's his side, there's her side, and then there's the truth. Well, that's what's going on here. We have their side of the story, we have the Jets side of the story, the Shark side of the story, but what we don't know is the truth, who began it. My suspicion is that the Jets actually began it because they felt that their home turf was invaded. And it's really interesting how they truly believe that they ruled the streets. And that's really something in the Jets song where they establish the fact that they really believe that being the Jets are the greatest thing that could possibly happen to mankind, and you can live it up and die in bed. That's a very good lyric too, because we have had experiences, all of us, in bed where we have been living it up and having a wonderful time, but live it up and die in bed. Dying in bed, of course, is something that will not happen to many of these characters in West Side Story. They will not. And in fact, one of the most interesting lines in the most recent movie is when Rip says, I'll die young, and not really believing it, but he's right. But he's right indeed. So that's kind of interesting too.
Peter, the homework assignment for the students, I'll give it to you for a second, was
Sure.
to think about the last version that they saw of West Side Story. And in that version, which of the four creators do you think had the most role in your enjoyment of the show? Do you have one?
So, but are you talking about the fact the last time I saw West Side Story was the movie? Is that what you mean?
So your choices are, Robbins is not one of the choices, right? Because the dances were not his. So your choices.
No, given the fact that I've seen West Side Story dozens of times, et cetera, et cetera, I'm just going to answer the question from the vantage point of which of the four collaborators do I feel made the greatest contribution.
Please.
And I would put Robbins in first place, definitely, because he was the one who really had to put it together. And he did something very radical that turned out to be standard procedure. He cost a lot of performers a lot of jobs. And what do I mean? In those days, every musical had a singing chorus and had a dancing chorus. Singers who had wonderful voices were there to make the music sound wonderful, but maybe they couldn't sing very well. Well, that's why we had a dancing chorus, because people come on, oh God, can these people dance? Oh, aren't they great? And if they opened their mouths, you wouldn't think they were so great. But Robin said, no, we are looking for triple threats. We are looking for people who can act. We are looking for people who can sing. We are looking for people who can dance. And that's it. And I bet we can find them. And they certainly did. So he had to do that. Of course, he was a very famous taskmaster, and he was very much hated by his cast. Always was, because he was such a taskmaster, and he always used to pick on somebody and make them an example of incompetence so that other people would get scared. But what's really surprising is the story that's often been attributed to the time when he was on stage. Now, his back is to the actual seats of the theater. All right, all the cast is on stage. They are facing out. They are facing the seats of the theater. Okay, get the image? And he's walking backwards, and he's not aware he's so close to the orchestra pit, and it looks like he's going to fall in. And not one person said, "Hey, Jerome, watch out! You're going to fall in the pit." They let him fall in the pit because they wanted that type of revenge for how crassly he'd been treating them. Now, Grover Dale, who was in the original cast, swears to me what actually happened was that they were so mesmerized by what he was saying, they didn't notice he was so close to the edge of the pit. Well, maybe, and maybe that's what Grover thought, but there were a lot of other kids in the cast too. Not one of them noticed. But Robbins was the one who had to come up with the choreography. Don't forget, that was the only other prize that West Side Story won for choreography, because so much of it was dance. And the miracle of it is the fact that you're making tough kids dance. And if you watch that original movie, or even this one, it's so interesting how they just start walking down the street and they suddenly start gliding, and then it breaks into dance. The transition from walking to dancing is beautifully and believably done. So Robbins, in fact, did the choreography for the movie and was co-director of the movie, but was fired because he was so difficult. And yet he got a special Oscar for choreography.
Wouldn't you say that the fact that he had already spent so much time choreographing sailors made it easier to move on to gang members?
Yes, I would. In fact, I think that's a very good observation, and I'm not sure it's one that's ever occurred to me. But yes, I think that's a very good observation entirely. Well, the thing is that luck always plays a part in any success of any show, and one of the lucky things was that and this is why Arthur Lawrence gets in second place, but very, very close to Robbins, is because he's the one who kept the project alive. He's the one who kept on saying, we started out talking about doing a musical about Italians and Jews, and we didn't much like it because it seemed like Davy's Irish Rose, which may have run a long time, but nobody really thought much of. But when he was noticing the gang stuff, and Leonard Bernstein did too, but when he was noticing the gang stuff, he was in Hollywood working on a movie. And what was so interesting was the fact that Robbins had to come out to Hollywood to do the sequences in the King and I movie. Now, if the King and I movie hadn't been made, they might have never had that meeting, because I'm in New York. I'm busy. I'm not coming out to Hollywood. But because he was coming out to Hollywood, where Lawrence was, and Bernstein was too, because he was doing a Hollywood Bowl thing, well, the confluence happened. And of course, Bernstein said, "I'll write the lyrics." And people said, "Well, gee, Lenny, okay, but let's see." And it was at a party where Sondheim actually was talking to Arthur Lawrence, and Lawrence said, "I'm doing this new show." They called it Gangway out of fun. Some people really think that for a while West Side Story truly was called Gangway. You can read that in places that that was a title they were considering. That was their joke title. They always used to refer to it that way when they were joking. But anyway, he mentioned, Sondheim said, "Who's doing the lyrics?" And Lawrence had heard Sondheim's first show that didn't get produced, called Saturday Night, and he thought, "Wow, I don't really like the music that much, but boy, the lyrics are terrific." So he said, "Well, maybe you could join in." And Bernstein said, "Well, all right, we'll co-write the lyrics." And there are actually posters from when the show was trying out in Washington, their first stop. There actually are posters that say lyrics by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. But Sondheim wound up writing so many of them that indeed Bernstein one time said to him, look, I mean, I don't need the credit. Tell you what, you've really done so much of this work. Why don't you take sole credit?" And sometimes, "Oh, wow, that is so gracious of you. Oh, thank you." He said, "And we'll give you some of the money too." "Oh, no, 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 I couldn't take the money." "Oh, no, thank you. No, the credit is enough." And like so many people who turned down money, he wound up regretting it. Not that Sondheim certainly ever really needed money. His estate was recently said to be 75 million. But everybody likes money, and everybody likes when you get money for what you've done. So he regretted not taking that 1.5%, which would have added up over the years. It certainly would have. But it's really interesting when we heard the four opinions at the beginning, when we heard Jerome Robbins, when we heard Leonard Bernstein, um, when we heard Arthur Lawrence. I assumed the fourth one, somebody was going to say Sondheim. It is interesting, nobody did, who again would have the greatest theatrical career of any of them because he was much more interested in Broadway than any of them. Lawrence, yeah, of course, would come back from time to time with a play or would try to, but nevertheless, Sondheim was the one who continued working. Sure, he would do a movie every now and then, but nevertheless, he always came back to Broadway. That's where his passion was, literally and figuratively, because he did a show called Passion. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing to look at the genesis of this show when you really think that this was such a maverick subject. I mean, nobody would ever think that a musical about juvenile delinquents. I mean, there were 3 deaths in West Side Story. Okay, Tony dies, right? Bernardo dies, right? Yeah, I mean, they're adding up. I mean, the Riff dies. Okay, now the Tonys had 9 years of awards before then, and if you add the deaths in all the best musical winners combined, you will find out that they equal the 3 in West Side Story. Because who died? All right, Cable in South Pacific, The King and the King and I, and one you might not know, there was a show called Kismet in which there was a wazir who was executed. All right. Now, the king lived a long life. We all got to go sometime. The wazir was a bad guy. We were glad when he was murdered. Everybody was glad to get rid of him. Cable, okay, sure. Yeah, we feel bad for him because he was a young guy and all that. But still, a lot of people in South Pacific were very wary of him marrying that Asian girl and coming back to mainline Philadelphia with her. So, but the thing was, musical comedies up until that time were musical comedies. The emphasis was on comedy. In the Pajama Game, the worst thing that happens is somebody gets fired. In Damn Yankees, the other Tony winner, the worst thing that happens is that Washington Senators may not win the World Series. The guy goes back home to his wife. My Fair Lady. Well, the worst thing that happens possibly is that Eliza and Henry won't get together, though it appears that they will at the end. It's not made clear, but it looks like they will at the end in the original production. So happy endings, usually were happening. And The Music Man certainly has a happy ending, even though the fact that everybody's been bilked of money. Marion says he brought music to the town, so he's a good guy. We should like him. He awakened our spirits. Well, yes and no. I would think a lot of those Iowa people wouldn't feel that way. But again, the show ends with a happy ending. Most of these shows had happy endings. Even The King and I, with the death of the king, we see that the new king, the kid, is not going to make people bow down anymore to him. I don't want that. So
And
we see progress.
Carousel?
Carousel predates the Tonys, so
Okay.
so I'm off the hook with that one. And even there was supposed to be redeemed. We're supposed to forgive him for doing that. So all things considered, we're really talking about something really quite wonderful, West Side Story, even though the language had to be cleaned up. And David and I have issues on this, but nevertheless, at one when in the scene in the candy store where the Jets are waiting for the Sharks to show up so that they can establish the rumble. It's so interesting when Arab, one of the characters, says, "Where the devil are they?" Well, he sounds more like Henry Higgins than a juvenile delinquent.
Right.
I mean, where the devil are they? You mean to tell me that kid isn't going to say, "Where the hell are they?" or worse?
Yeah.
So the language was pretty much cleaned up. And Arthur Lawrence said, no matter what language I choose, it's going to seem dated. So what I'm going to do is make up words that they're going to have their own special language, like frabba jabba, things like that, that won't date as such. But we all have to admit that so much of the dialogue in West Side Story is rather rarefied for these juvenile delinquents. And of course, it comes to a big head in G. Officer Krupke, when indeed we have the ending Krupp you. Now, Sondheim actually wrote that famous 2-word expression, including an F word, an expression which will never be confused with Merry Christmas. And that was his original impulse. And they said, you cannot possibly do that. You have to understand that the S word, meaning feces, hadn't even shown up in a Broadway musical yet. So the idea of having the F word, which was considered at that time the most vulgar word of all.
And when they say spit hits the fan in, is that
Yeah.
Sondheim or Lawrence?
No, they were very circumspect about that.
Yeah, yeah.
You couldn't get that out of either one of them.
Really?
Any more than when you ask Betty Compton and Adolph Green, who came up with that line? They'd say, "We don't remember." When I did a panel discussion with them, I asked them that question specifically. They said, "We don't remember." And I said, "And if you did remember, would you tell me?" They said, "No." No, they were very circumspect on that. But nevertheless, we can infer that Sondheim was more inclined to write that H in the word spit, replacing the P. But nevertheless, it's very mealy mouthed compared to what the fact that we know what these kids would be saying. And I was always amazed as the years went on and people became far more accustomed to hearing words with S's and F's that had been censored, that certainly they had shown up in many, many musicals. And of course, you can hear 7-year-old kids on the street using these words as if they're just arbitrary nouns and adjectives. I would think that Sondheim would have definitely changed his lyrics to reflect what had happened during the ensuing years and what would have really happened in 1957 out of the mouths of those kids. It always amazed me that he never did it and never seemed interested in doing it. And I had always hoped that this new movie would do that. I expected that was going to be the big surprise of that movie, that indeed we were going to have those real words that people would actually say in the film. And that didn't happen there either. And this is a much tougher movie than the original movie. It's a much smarter movie. I mean, a lot of people said, why are they remaking West Side Story? It's a masterpiece. Oh my God, they're going to ruin it. Well, of course, there are different opinions on this, but if I may cast my 3 electoral votes, I say they improved it. I say they improved it tremendously. For one thing, you get so many backstories. Bernardo was a fighter. Yes, because in those days, immigrants and blacks, the only way they could succeed was either by sports or by entertainment. So Bernardo was going to do what he can, and we have to fear for his future. He never got it, but nevertheless, you know how boxers wind up. We saw how Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, how he wound up as the years went on after taking all those beatings to his head. So, but nevertheless, at that point, Bernardo thought he was invincible, as most kids do. And giving a backstory to Chino's that he's going to night school. Oh my God, this makes the tragedy even greater. This kid was really trying to make something of himself. And because he had to show off, and of course, because Bernardo was mentoring him and believed in him, and that's something that's shown in this movie, which isn't shown in the original. That's a very smart detail. So he is not just getting back at Tony, as Tony is Maria's boyfriend, but he's getting back because Tony killed Bernardo, and Bernardo was wonderful to him. So that's very significant as well. A lot of smart decisions in this movie, a lot of smart ones, and we're very, very lucky that happened. And we're lucky we got back to the original lyric in the quintet with Anita, because there's a fabulous line. It must have pained Sondheim so much in the original movie when she says, poor dear, don't matter if he's tired as long as he's here. Well, the original lyric is he's going to walk in. So what? Don't matter if he's tired as long as he's hot. He'll walk in hot and tired. So what? Don't matter if he's tired as long as he's hot. Now, that's a very clever lyric, because what she means by hot and tired in the first part, she means sweaty, exhausted, okay, but sweaty. And when she says, don't matter if he's tired as long as he's hot, what she means there, of course, is energetic in bed. So we have 2 different meanings of the word hot, but that was considered too hot for the 1961 movie, and that's why those lyrics were changed. And it's really too bad that they were, because the original lyric has far more pungency than the original. So that's
one of the things that Peter has taught me is that when you write a review, it's not your job to just say if you liked it or you didn't like it. It is Peter's job in his own mind to help people find the shows that they want to see. So he'll try to not say this is good or this is bad. He'll try to say, well, if you like this kind of thing, then this might be the right show for you. So my question is did I get that wrong?
Well, no. Let me explain that a little further, though you're right. The way I put it is, I do not care if I like a show or not. It has nothing to do with me. When I am reviewing, what I want to do is find the right show for the right person. I call myself a theatrical matchmaker.
Right.
I want the right show to be. I have given so many favorable reviews to shows I have not liked
Mm-hmm.
because I know that there's an audience for them. There was a show called I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change that was trying out in New Jersey. I didn't laugh once. I barely smiled. It wasn't for me. Why? Why? Because it was about singles trying to find love. Well, at that point, this is 1994, I had been with the same woman for 16 years. By the way, we just celebrated our 44th anniversary
Wonderful.
of unmarried bliss, but that's another story. But anyway, the point is, I had nothing in common with these young people who were looking for romance.
Right. So my
So
question is, with this show, who would you recommend the early version to, and who would you recommend the Spielberg version to?
Oh, I'm sorry to say I'd recommend the Spielberg version to everybody.
Everybody.
I think, yeah, I'm afraid I'd have to say that. I think it wipes the floor with the original movie, and it answers so many. I would love to know how many times Tony Kushner watched that original movie, because obviously all these solutions did not come to him all at once. He must have said, "Wait a minute, what? Chino is a cipher. You know, why indeed do we not know more about Chino? Wait
Yeah.
a minute, how come we don't know more about Bernardo? Let's really investigate who these people really were." So so that's really important, that he deepened those characters. Also, the fact that Bernardo and Anita are living together with Maria, and
Yeah.
it makes the tension on that fire escape that much more difficult, because after all, yes, if the parent came out and saw her with this boy, he'd be upset. He wouldn't be happy. He'd chide her. But if Bernardo came out and saw that she was with the guy that she had just kissed at the dance, whoa,
Right.
so the tension is really much more palpable there, much more palpable, that they're really risking what's going on. Because for all Tony knows, Bernardo could take out a switchblade and kill him right then and there. It could happen. He's there on a fire escape. Doesn't have his balance, and it's so interesting to see the getting to that fire escape. That you actually see that it's not easy for him. At some point, you see the metal bars of the fire escape actually being a barrier between him and Maria.
Right.
That's terrific too. They don't make it easy for him. They don't make it easy for him. And there's even a joke when he's walking down the street singing Maria. A lot of people open their windows. Why? Because they're all named Maria. That's a very common Spanish
Oh,
name.
I didn't
And
get that. Very funny.
yeah, that's what's going on there. So
Maria.
it's not it's not just to say who the hell is out there singing. It has to do with the fact that that's there too. So so that's really
questions, I assume.
what?
You can take some student questions.
Sure.
Right. We're going to start with Gail on our right, who is a long time, not only student, but teacher in this class. She is a major Sondheim aficionado. She taught the class on Gypsy that was back on Monday, and she will be teaching Sunday in the Park with George on March 7th. So Gail asked, she's got some Sondheim question for, I'm going to add you as a spotlight for Peter. So I thought I'd pass the baton to you. Hi, Gail.
Thanks so much, David. Hi. Wow, this is amazing, Peter. Thank you. I'm learning so much and I'm enjoying it so much. Thank you so much for your insights.
God love you.
I have a Sondheim question, as David had said. We've learned in recent years that Sondheim contributed not insubstantially to the music, to Stein's music in Gypsy, through
Yes.
paper, through his research that Mark Eden Horowitz, among other people, have done. So my question to you is, do we have any evidence at all that he and Bernstein might have sat down at the piano and worked stuff out together? Or can we really imagine there was a complete separation there?
I have never heard that Sondheim was involved in the music of West Side Story. It might have been a well-kept secret, but one would think that this 27-year-old guy would certainly observe the barriers and thinking, hey, this guy has composed many hit shows and I haven't. So my guess would be, and that's all it is that it's every bit of Bernstein's music. In terms of Gypsy, really the only thing that Sondheim did musically was the end sequence, Rose's Turn.
And here's another video I think you'll like.